Chapter 8. Treatment is a realization of omnipresence. Many people are puzzled as to how the patient, rather than 100 million other people, receives the benefit of a treatment if it is not necessary to know his name or his condition, and if neither of these is taken into a treatment. The answer is found in the basic principle of oneness. The particular patient who has asked for help receives that help because he has reached out to the consciousness of the practitioner who understands that there is not a patient consciousness, a practitioner consciousness, and a God consciousness. There is only one consciousness, God consciousness. When a patient turns to a truly dedicated God-conscious practitioner, he makes himself a part of that practitioner's God consciousness. Furthermore, a person may ask for help for his child, his parents, his pet poodle, or for his crops, and in so doing, he brings them to the one infinite divine consciousness, which the practitioner is. Strangely enough, a person who does not bring himself to this consciousness may sit with his ills in the same room right next to the practitioner year in and year out and receive no benefit. Jesus walked up and down the Holy Land for 3 years, every day encountering the sick and the sinning, but only to those who came to him begging, "Master, Master, heal me," did he turn and say, "Do you believe that I can do this?" Only those who brought themselves into the consciousness of the Master, only those who were a part of the multitude that sat at his feet, only they received the benediction of his great blessing. Nearly everyone is surrounded with people who are in need of healing of one kind or another, and this poses the question as to what responsibility rests with a person regarding those who come within his orbit. Should treatment be withheld until help has been specifically requested? What about those in the world he sees around him who are in need of healing? Is he his brother's keeper? Such questions could not arise were this basic principle of treatment understood. No treatment is ever given to anyone or to any condition. As you move about this world, inevitably aware of its frustrations and tragedies, you never treat anyone or any condition. Never. It is the claim that is presented to you that receives the treatment, and that claim is always the belief in a selfhood or condition separate and apart from God. Whenever any belief intrudes itself upon your thought, you must do something about it, not something to the person or the condition, but only to the claim as it presents itself to your thought. When you see what looks like deformity, insanity, or an accident, go within. Realize that this which you are witnessing is an illusion. Feel the divine peace of God's presence. Every specific claim that presents itself to you has to be met in your consciousness, not only when people ask you for help, but whenever you observe a need. If you walk along the street and see an intoxicated person, that is a claim impinging on your consciousness, and it is in your consciousness that it must be met. If you see a crippled person, or if you see a beggar, do not ignore him. Do not pass him by. Do not be like those who passed by the man on the road to Jericho and let him lie there. Do not you let him lie there. Physically, you may pass him by, but spiritually lift him right up to the truth of being. Some years ago, in Honolulu, a young woman in one of our classes who was taking a bus home had her attention attracted to a man at the rear of the bus, very boisterous and obscene in his language. She immediately began to realize that God was manifest as individual being, that each individual includes all that God is, and that individual being has only the qualities of God. She did not treat the man. She did not know the truth about the man or the condition. She began with herself, and finally he came over and said, "Thank you, miss, for praying for me. I'm all right now." You cannot pass by or ignore people who are sick, sinful, or dying. You cannot evade your responsibility to lift them up in your consciousness through the realization of the infinite nature of God appearing as individual being. If there is any degree of receptivity, they will feel it. That is how you bless your neighbor as yourself and pray for your enemy. Your enemy is never a person. Your enemy is always an appearance. Every appearance of sin, disease, discord, lack, and limitation. There is only one way to pray, and that is to ask yourself, do I believe my eyes, or do I believe the mystics of the world, those people who have had an intuitive contact with God and who have never had the revelation that evil does not exist as a reality and that there is no law of sin or disease? Many people feel that they would like to give or have treatments given to their children, husbands, wives, and friends who are not even interested in spiritual healing, who are not on the spiritual path, and who have no desire to be on it. Despite their lack of interest, their well-meaning metaphysical friend or relative reaches out to help them because he loves them so much that he wants to see them free, and in his zeal he thinks he has the power to do it. It cannot be emphasized too strongly, however, that every individual has the right to his own life and the right to his own death. He has the right to be healthy, and he has just as much right to be sick. He has as much right to seek his health through materia medica as any other person has to seek his through God. The medically minded person does not relish having truth thrust down his throat by his metaphysical friends any more than does the one who seeks his health and harmony through spiritual wisdom or truth like to have his friends or members of his family interfering with him and attempting to dissuade him from his course. Therefore, the person who believes in and practices spiritual healing must be extremely careful that he accords to all others the same freedom which he desires for himself. All things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. And if anyone wants to use medicine, surgery, or any other form of material aid, he has a right to it, and he should be set free to find his good in his own way. In cases where one person's demonstration affects another's, where a parent, husband, wife, or child is involved, it is not only the right, but the duty and privilege of the metaphysical student to know the truth and attain his own peace through a realization of God. Whether or not it frees those close to him is another thing. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it does not. Sometimes it opens up in them a desire for freedom, even for spiritual freedom. But whether or not it does that, by abiding in the truth, he has done all that he can do. Always there must be a measure of receptivity before a person can receive help. That grain of faith, that, do you believe that this can be done? All treatment is individual. But as has already been explained, the name, face, body, or anything which would identify the patient or disease does not enter the thought of the practitioner of spiritual healing. However, if a person telephones a practitioner to the effect that he is suffering from influenza, the treatment might be specific to the extent of dealing with the belief of infection or contagion, or the world belief of weather or climate, but not in the sense of thinking specifically of the patient or the disease. If a call came relaying the circumstances of an accident, a practitioner might well realize in his treatment that God maintains law and order and sustains every idea in divine consciousness, and that nothing ever has or will escape from the harmony, order, and law of that divine consciousness. To that extent he would be specific, but never would he be specific to the extent of treating a broken leg or arm or a pain, whether on the right side or the left side, up or down. A person might have a pain in the region of the heart and yet not have heart trouble at all. Would it not be foolish then to attempt to treat the heart? It would make no difference if 300 or 300 people asked for help the same day. The process would always be the same. The moment an individual asks for help, that is when he and nobody else receives the treatment. No practitioner can make a list of names and think, I am going to give all these people a treatment tonight. Actually, the treatment must be given the very moment a patient comes to his thought, whether that is by telephone, letter, telegraph, or whether suddenly the thought of the patient comes into his mind. At that instant, the treatment takes place, and not 1 minute later. If somebody should come into my thought this very minute while I am writing this book, he would receive a treatment immediately. I would not dare to wait even 1 minute to give the treatment, because there is only one time to correct the belief, and that is when it comes to me. That is the time for the reinterpretation or unfoldment. The secret of healing is in reaction, in this immediate reinterpretation. There are practitioners who keep lists of patients, and they go through that list giving treatments when they get up in the morning and when they go to bed at night. Why do they do this? Why should it be necessary to go through a list of names giving treatments if the treatment is given when the call comes to them? The work should have been done at that time, unless the practitioner has been specifically asked again for help. It is the obligation of a practitioner to stand by with a case and to continue his work until he has achieved a feeling of release or until the patient has asked him to discontinue the work. It is the function of the practitioner to give the patient help, but after he has given it and has felt a sense of release, he must assume that the burden is on God's shoulder and that it has been taken care of. Unless it comes back to his thought, or unless he has asked for help again, he should drop the case. It is not as if the practitioner were really trying to heal something when he has asked for help. The help he is expected to give is the realization that such conditions do not exist as reality. That is the reason he does not have to feel under the necessity of giving another treatment tomorrow. If the error does not exist today, it should not exist tomorrow. And furthermore, any error which does not exist today could not have existed yesterday. That is the reason why people at great distances frequently receive their help before I receive their requests for help. Every day I remind myself that any error that is not true today was not true yesterday. And if it were not true yesterday, it was not true at the time the request for help was sent. I live always in the realization that this is the only moment, and the harmony that exists this moment is an eternal harmony which has always existed and always will exist. As I abide in that, everyone who reaches out to me for help must receive it, and he must receive it at the moment that he reaches out, since that is when I am knowing the truth. When a practitioner awakens in the morning, he should not have a single patient unless he receives a call for help that very morning. Why should he, if he took care of the case at the moment the call came? Throughout the years of my practice, I have handled many cases a day. One year, I averaged 135 calls a day, 7 days a week, and never did I have a list of patients to treat. When a letter came, the help was given, and the person and the problem forgotten, unless it came back to mind or unless he wrote again. When a call for help comes, I take the position that this is the day the Lord hath made, and this is the moment in which I do the work. If the patient drops from thought, that is the end of it, but if he keeps returning to my thought each time, the treatment will be the highest I know. Every day, however, I do what might be considered group work, because morning and night I realize that anyone, anywhere, or any time reaching out to my consciousness does not have to wait to communicate with me personally, but that he must receive his answer instantaneously. All that is necessary is to reach out, and the answer will come. This type of work is not group treatment in the commonly accepted sense of the term. However, it might be called that, inasmuch as I am not thinking of any specific individual, not of 30, 40, or 100 individual people, but of a patient body or a student body. In going into meditation for such a group, which I do many times a day, I would not take 40 or 100 different people into consciousness. I would merely know that as a group, they are not affected by world beliefs or suggestions. From then on, the group would not come into my meditation. My meditation would be wholly centered on God and the principle involved, which is that God is the consciousness of individual being. In that divine consciousness, there are no laws of matter, no laws of weather, no beliefs operate in the mind, which is the instrument of consciousness, or God. There is only one presence, one power, one consciousness, and that God consciousness is the consciousness of the group. It is through such daily meditation periods in which many of us in the Infinite Way embrace in our consciousness all of our students, that our worldwide student body is maintained relatively free of world mesmerism, and thereby sin, disease, lack, and other human discords are lessened in their experience. There might also be times when I would be thinking of my family, not of each member specifically, but of the family as a unit. Then I would meditate in the same way as I would for one of our Infinite Way classes, knowing that God constitutes the mind, the life, and the soul of my family. Nothing can enter from without to create discord or inharmony, because all law and government are from within, from the divine consciousness, which is the life of the individual and of the family. If I were a teacher in a schoolroom, in a Sunday school, or if I were the minister of a church, that is how I would meditate. In the first place, I would go into meditation because of the class or congregation, but then I would immediately dismiss them from consciousness and rise into the realization that since God is the church consciousness and God is the consciousness of every individual who constitutes the church, only one law is operating in that classroom or church. The government is on his shoulders. The only other occasion for a group treatment might be in connection with the armed forces throughout the world. In such cases, no one individual would be singled out as if there were one truth about one person and a different truth about another, but God would be realized as the consciousness of everyone involved in the situation, and this must include the armies of the enemies as well as our own. A good general rule to follow is not to attempt to give group treatments except in situations similar to those cited above. The only other time that group healing or the treating of many patients together is advisable is when a practitioner turns to God in a realization of conscious oneness for the sake of communion with God, but without any individual cases first entering thought. He is not dealing specifically with any of these cases, but whoever is reaching out to him will be healed, and perhaps even 4 or 5 during that period of meditation. The practitioner is not treating a group of patients. He is consciously one with God, and while he is in communion with God, all those who reach out and touch his consciousness at that moment find healing. From many years of experience, I know that the degree of my upliftment determines the degree of harmony, peace, joy, prosperity, health, and wholeness of those who constitute my practice or student body. To illustrate, in the early years of my practice, I was kept busy during the winter with many calls, sometimes hundreds, for the healing of influenza, colds, and pneumonia. Then one winter in New England, an experience took place which opened my consciousness to the depth of Jesus' statement, "I and my Father are one." One evening I left the office after 29 calls had come in during the afternoon from people in different stages of colds, grippe, and the flu. The next morning, almost before I was seated in my office, there were 6 more calls. At that particular time I was very busy, and, of course, every chair in my office waiting room was usually occupied, and my appointment book was always filled. On this day, however, when I looked at my appointment book, I found that there were no appointments scheduled for the hour from 1 to 2, and that was something that had never before happened to me. Furthermore, I had not consciously or deliberately arranged it in that way, so I wondered, what has happened? What does this mean? Then, in a flash, it came to me. Oh, I didn't do that. I had nothing to do with that. This must have been God's work. There must be a reason for this. And so I closed the office door, just as if I were a patient, sat down and said, "Father, there is a meaning to this. Let me know what it is." And then I waited in meditation until this came to me. You do not have 35 cases of colds and the flu. You have only one, and that one is the belief in a selfhood apart from God. It is a belief that there are powers operating in consciousness other than God. Can you accept any power outside of God, the one consciousness, the one divine intelligence? Can you acknowledge that there is some power operating outside of your own consciousness? That was a new idea. During the afternoon following that revelation, there were no further calls relative to that particular type of problem. Every one, or very nearly every one of those patients was healed during that hour of realization. Just as soon as the truth of being registered in my consciousness, all these people were released. It was not a matter of giving each one a treatment. It was not a matter of meditating for them or thinking about them. It was a matter of the truth of being registering in my consciousness. And then every one who had brought himself to my consciousness was healed. If I am entertaining the truth of being, any one, any 35, or any 300 who come to my consciousness partake of the nature of the truth operating in that consciousness. That is the way to treat. That is how to go about the world, being a blessing and a benediction. You do not treat people, and you do not try to realize the Christ in them. You realize the Christ as the only being. Realize the Christ. Feel the Christ. Feel the warmth of love within your own being. Many of those you are silently blessing will have healings, and some of them will find their way to truth because you will have opened up the spiritual center in them which heretofore had not been open. I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me.